This took place in mid-May 2014 in the Cherokee Creek Nation in the small town of Gore, Oklahoma. I was out at my uncle's house, who lives in Gore. We had been eating dinner and talking about the Skinwalker and about how it was in the area. It was about 9:45, and we decided to go outside to see if we could see one. We went out on the front porch, looking around, but didn't see anything, thinking we might have heard something. Mind you, all of us are very avid believers of the Skinwalker, and we really wanted to see one. So we went back inside the house. The eldest of our group, who is about 43, decided to go outside one more time, after swearing he could have heard something outside the house that wasn't normal. After about 5 minutes later, we heard a scream. We all jumped and ran outside. After turning on the lights and looking around, but not seeing anything, we called out to our friend, but he did not answer. We noticed that the light on the front of the house was on, but we did not remember turning it on. We went to the front door, unlocking it, going outside to see if he had gone out front, and there he was, all pale. His hair was all messed up, and he looked terrified. We asked him what had happened. He would not talk. We told him to come get in the truck and come home. He got in the truck, and his friends followed us in the vehicle. When I finally got him to talk, he said he saw it. He said it was on all fours and had red eyes. He said that it came out of the woods towards him and ran towards the house. He said he ran up the steps, unsure of what to do. He stood there for a few moments, then felt safe enough to open the door and come out. He said he knew we were out there, but did not want to come out for fear that we would see it. He is about 6'4" and 280 pounds. He said it was about 5 feet tall and had red eyes. He swears that what he saw was real, and he has not been drinking. He doesn't really drink much anyway. He is also a very spiritual person, so I believe he saw something out there. The next day, we went out there and looked around with sunlight. There were 2 large sets of tracks by the door, and they looked as if something had been standing there and then quickly ran off. We did not see anything else. When we got back to the house, we had this eerie feeling left over, like something was watching us from the woodline, and that we were not alone. Maybe our desire to wanting to see this thing caused it to actually manifest and show itself. It makes me wonder. I could be wrong on this, but I would love to know your opinion and what you think. Thank you for taking the time to read this. In 1999, I was driving home from work just as the sun was going down. I was driving along a country road, a 2-lane road, no other cars in sight. I approached a long S-like curve on the straight stretch of the road that followed the S-curve. I was going at a normal speed, and a huge, dark, hairy creature started running alongside my car. My first thought was that it was a bear, but it wasn't a bear. It was a lot bigger, and was running on 2 legs bipedally, and also moving much faster than a bear. I was going about 40 to 45 miles an hour at the time, and it was running alongside my car. I was puzzled. I did not know what it was, and I was scared. I hit the gas, and it decided to bolt off into the woods. It was hands down the most frightening experience of my life. I never told anybody about it, because I thought nobody would believe me. Years later, I've tried to research it. I believe that what I saw that night was a Skinwalker. It looked like a large bear, but it was acting more human. It acted like it wanted to scare me. And that's what it looked like to me. I was only about 15 to 17 years old, and I lived in a very rural area of southeastern Oklahoma, in a town that had probably less than 200 in population. It was night, and I had to get something from a warehouse about a mile outside of town. I was driving a rather powerful car for my age, I will say that. It was dark along the road, and I was about 3/4 of a mile away to my destination when I rounded a bend and saw what I thought was a deer standing in the middle of the road. I braked, but did not slow down as I approached what I thought was a deer. It started off standing at the edge of the road on the driver's side. It was facing my direction. I was almost even with it at this point, and as I got closer, it did not move. It was like a deer that was frozen in the headlights. I was only going about 30 miles an hour by this time, and at this point, my car was only a few feet from it. It then turned completely, its whole body, and looked right at me in the eyes. Its head was much larger and was gray. I think it was maybe 6 feet tall, if not more. I'll never forget the face. It was terrifying. It was deer, but also very human. I only saw it for a split second, but I saw its mouth open. I saw the teeth. I saw the eyes. It was as if it was letting me know how much power it had and how much it could do to me. I could feel the eyes bore into me, burning. I looked away, slamming on the accelerator. I looked again as I was passing it. It turned quickly, moving and disappearing out of sight. It had disappeared on the passenger side, and I caught a glimpse of it one last time. It was huge. The car was only about 12 feet from it when I was even with it, and I realized its arms were longer than I could imagine. I'm 6'2", and I know for a fact it was taller than me. As I passed it, it seemed to pace me for a few seconds before it pulled away, and it could go back into the darkness. I knew it was staring at me. Once I reached my destination, I could not get out of the car for a couple of minutes. I was shaking. I had never been so scared in my life. I was afraid that the car would not start again and this thing would come to get me. If not for that, I would have just turned around and gone home. I've never really told anybody about this, not even my family. They would have thought I was crazy. Almost 30 years later, I have finally told my adult children. I have an incredible respect for people who have these experiences. I've always wondered if it was something from this world or something from another. When I was staying on the Apache reservation with my grandparents when I was much younger, I heard a horrible howling sound. It was definitely not a wolf, coyote, etc. It reminded me of a wolf mixed with a human screaming and screaming. My grandfather informed me at the time that it was a skinwalker. I had never heard anything like it before or since, and I have heard coyotes, wolves, etc., and it was not any of these. I will never forget that sound. It was like the howling came from off in the distance, and then it got louder and louder. It almost gave me the impression that it was coming closer and closer. I cannot forget that horrible howling sound. It wasn't until a couple of weeks later that I found out that that was a skinwalker. It came to visit our house at the time. That night, my dad was out on the back porch smoking, which is a big no-no. If a skinwalker sees you, you will be cursed. Well, my dad was on the back porch and saw something coming around the corner of the house. It literally came out of nowhere. My dad saw it, and it was only about 30 feet from him. It had its head down, like it was grazing, he had described. When it saw my dad, it immediately looked up at him and had huge eyes. He said they were very much like an owl's. It was very tall, very skinny, and had long arms. It had huge hands, but the nails were very long and pointed like claws or like daggers. It disappeared very quickly in the opposite direction, but my dad went back inside. He knew it was still around. When my father told my grandpa what he saw, my grandpa informed him that it was a skinwalker, and it will probably lure around the house now. My dad still gets shaken up talking about it. I will never forget the sound or the sound of my dad telling his story. I am a Native American, and we know about the skinwalkers because it is well versed in our culture and our church. I even went to college to study sociology and anthropology. I hope to do a research on the skinwalkers. There are so many stories about them. It is a shame that so many people do not believe in their existence. I know they are there. My grandfather's family and my grandma's family have seen them on reservations. I will never forget the experience. I hope that anybody who reads this approaches it with an open mind. In the summer of 2012, I worked at the State Fair of Texas in the pony exhibit. I was in the barn currently, grooming one of the ponies. He was just snuffling around, doing his thing. I was in the corner of the stall, grooming the pony. When I looked up, you know how you just get that feeling, and you look up? That's what I had. And I saw what I thought was a pig, except it was black and not pink, standing up on its hind legs, arms and hands on the bars, looking into the stall. I froze. Its ears were pointy and big, and its eyes were huge and almost human. They reminded me of a wild animal, but still very human, if that makes sense. I remember thinking, I can't believe I'm looking at a pig on two legs. I stood up, slowly, and backed out of the stall on the other side. I felt like I was being watched, and wanted to get away from it. And when I say being watched, I don't mean just by this thing, but all around me. I looked over at the next stall to see if there was anybody around. There wasn't. I was by myself. I looked over the other way, toward the barn door. Nobody coming in. I was screwed. I looked back and this pig man was gone. That was it. The ponies were fine. They acted weird, but nothing happened. I've gone there back to work at the fair. I do not want to see whatever that was again. It's possible that I experienced a shapeshifter of some kind. I don't know what else it could have been. It seemed to be more intelligent than an animal, but it wasn't like any animal I've ever seen before. I have nightmares about it. I've told very few people about what I saw. I don't want to be labeled as crazy, but I know I saw something bizarre. I felt like it was watching me. I don't know why. It was completely still though. It never moved. The only thing that happened when I looked at it was that the ears kind of twitched a little, like it was watching me curiously. I firmly believe that what I laid eyes on was a skinwalker. Hiking down in the canyon of the St. Regis River in the Adirondacks one night in early September of 2017, I witnessed a set of 3 or 4 lights moving down in the canyon below. Then a second set of 3 or 4 lights come up from below and then move down the left side of the canyon. Both sets passed within 50 yards of me, and I was wearing a headlamp. I shined my light down the ridge, then the other side of the creek. Both times I was able to see them for a few seconds, and both times I saw the same thing. These were human-shaped creatures that were roughly 8 to 9 feet tall and completely covered in this glistening pale blue fur. They were running very fast with a fluid-like motion, like a deer or buck running through the woods. Graceful, yet powerful. Terrifying, yet chaotic. This has been very hard for me to process. It was so bizarre. The first sighting was 3 or 4 of these creatures. I saw them move quickly down into the canyon below me. I saw their glowing blue bodies moving through the woods. I read on a website, which I can't remember, a guy had seen something similar in the same area about a year before. He said the same thing about them being covered in almost bioluminescent blue fur. Well, a week later, I was hiking in the same area and I heard the most blood-curdling scream, followed by this strange mechanical screeching nearby. I saw the same type of creature come up from the other side of the creek. I watched it for a few seconds, and then it moved quickly down the creek, never noticing me, thank God. It was too dark to see its features, but it was very humanoid in nature, and running and moving incredibly fast. Both times, I saw very similar characteristics, although not the same. The creatures were blue and glowing, 9 feet tall, easily, and incredibly fast. I heard a similar story of a guy who was walking through the woods and then chased by about 4 or 5 of these humanoids. Camping near the Chippewa Reservation, just outside of Rice Lake, Wisconsin. My brother and I had heard similar sounds to a siren, though it was not a siren. It is hard to describe the sound. It was very loud, high-pitched and almost mechanical, but still animal-like. The first day we heard it, We laughed, thinking maybe it was a wolf or an animal, but it seemed to be coming from a distance. It sounded strange, but we wrote it off. We had picked a spot to camp that was between two large creeks. We could hear the creeks, so when we heard the animal, it was to our right, not too far away. We guessed it was maybe 100 yards or so, but the sound had echoed. It was hard to tell. We lay down in our sleeping bags and tried to go to sleep, but the sound kept us awake. It was loud enough to wake us up a few times. It could not have been a wolf or a coyote, because it stayed in a pattern and was continuous. As I said, it was like a siren, but not. We eventually fell asleep. It was the last we heard of the animal. That night, though, we both awakened to what we could have sworn was the sound of our dead grandmother's voice, calling our names in the dead of night. It was very eerie, and made it hard to fall back asleep. It was distinctly our grandmother's voice, and we both heard it. She had been dead for a while. The next day, we took a hike to the top of the hill. We were surprised to see how near we were to the reservation. We could even see smoke far off, rising in the distance. We began hearing the animal noises. It was a loud scream, almost making me jump 10 feet in the air. This sound was different and indescribable. It sounded like something very big, almost like a giant woman screaming. It was similar to the sound we heard the night before, but different. It sounded larger. We could see that the sound was coming from a very large forest nearby, a ways into the res. We hurried off to the hill and came back to our camp. Later that night, we had heard the voice of our grandmother again. It sounded almost like a warning, as though we were in danger. We pretty much did not sleep at all that night. It is as though the animal got mad at us for hiking to the top of this hill because we kept hearing it. The morning was eerie. We decided to pack things up and just leave. We went to the Whitefish Dunes State Park near Lake Michigan. It was a beautiful drive. The sound was very loud and similar to the other sounds we had heard, though it did not. We were convinced this animal did follow us. We parked, walked along the beach for a while. It was about 4 p.m. by that time. We decided to settle in for the night. We had a tent trailer, so we decided to sleep in that. My brother and I set up tent and drove the trailer into the woods to our left. It was dark by the time we got everything set up, so we sat by the fire, relaxed and talked until we heard the animal. It was to our left, coming closer. We could hear something large crunching through the woods, and it sounded very, very large. It was walking bipedally on 2 feet, and we knew it was a large, heavy man or something else. We tried to come up with every possible solution of what it could be. A wolf, a coyote, a bear, but nothing seemed to match the feet patterns. And after a while of the crunching, all the noise around us stopped, even the crickets. It was very, very eerie and scary. We felt like whatever it was watching us, right in the woodline. We were too scared to get up and go look and investigate, so we just went to bed. That night again, we had heard our grandmother's voice, although, even though we heard her voice, whatever she was saying was indiscernible. We were too scared. The trailer luckily had a solid wall, so whatever it was could not see in. The following morning, which I think we were so exhausted, we must have slept, we decided to pack up and go home. I had never seen my brother so shaken. Whatever it was had given us both vivid nightmares. The sounds, the mechanical sounds, the roaring and the howling, the siren noise. Out of all the animal sounds in the woods, this was so distant from anything that I grew up knowing. Whatever it was definitely big and fast, and I believe had a very evil, dark aura to it. I'm sure of it. We could hear it. There's no mistaking that it was not around. My speculation is that I think we had an encounter and had been followed by a Skinwalker, since they seem to do things like this, follow you from location to location, mark you supernaturally, and imitate the voices of dead relatives or friends, or even living ones. Is there anything we can do to protect ourselves? My brother and I are too scared to tell anybody about this for fear of ridicule and embarrassment, so we thought we'd look online and see if there's anywhere we can seek advice or help for our situation. Thank you for taking the time to consider what we've had to say.